Namaste. Namaskar. So I'm Samir Deshpande. I'm a faculty in the university. While I have not changed my name over the last 1 year, our organizer has. I just want to declare this, Gary, you're still the same fucked up guy that you were last year.
I thought you were saying you were asking to all shows.
I'm waiting. But talking about change or no change, I have to say that Gary has continued to organize this beautiful conference with the same beautiful quality. So I think he deserves a round of applause. And since we are on the theme of change, I have to narrate, as I introduce our next speaker, Tom Crockett, I have to narrate the experience I had with him. Our first interaction was under beautiful circumstances, amazing circumstances. Actually, I'm lying. We just met there in that section. We both are good backbenchers, so we're sitting there. And in one of those sessions where Gary makes us shout, where we lose all our voice, I was trying to meditate. I was trying to sleep actually, but under the garb of meditation, I was actually having a nice morning nap. But here's a guy sitting next to me hammering away at the keyboard. And I said, man, he must be an American. He's aggressive. And I was right. And so in one of those follow-up sessions when we started chatting with each other, having this non-dual communication which I did last year, or this year, the problem with that Tom did was not to upset me, he upset an asshole. Like that is me. So the asshole speaks out. And I told him how upset I was to disturb my peaceful morning nap. But then he apologized, and that I knew this guy was unique because I know Americans make mistakes. That's not an exception. The exception was an American not only made a mistake, but he apologized for what he did.
Doing my bit for world peace.
Starts with an apology.
Yes, yes.
And so here's a beautiful, unique American who also writes beautiful books. I read one of those. Actually, what I liked about it was it has a lot of pictures. And I get my message from those pictures. You know, given my preference for Penthouse and Playboy, I have developed a knack for reading style. I get my message from the pictures. And I go pretty deep into that.
You're hearing the Yuck Yucks tomorrow night, right?
My satsang is tomorrow morning.
Beautiful! Great!
So here's to you, Tom Crockett, a sexy American. And with those beautiful thoughts, I have to say I have to run out of the room because I have to go and attend Father's Day celebration for my daughter. So I'll be back in an hour.
Okay, I've got a big American voice, so if you're having trouble hearing me, I'll go to the microphone, but are we okay right now? Yeah. Okay, good. Back there. Oh, and can we turn the lights? Yes. Out, down. Yeah, I guess that works. So the title of the talk is Oz all there is? What happens when we get to the other side of the rainbow? Or really, the challenge of embodying enlightenment. In a lot of ways, I'm not saying anything that probably the people speaking yesterday were talking about, or that Isaac was talking about just a few minutes ago. I'm just doing it with pictures, just a different way. I'm using these kind of words: illumination, awakening, enlightenment, non-dual awareness, realization, all pretty much interchangeably. But the thing about them is that they're all really difficult to talk about, if not really boring to talk about. If you don't find like a metaphor, a story, some way to talk about them, because they get very dry and very abstract very quickly. So I'm really just a non-dual guy looking for a metaphor here. I'm not coming at this because I'm enlightened. And in case you think I'm just like trying to make you get on your good side, I brought my wife, and she can testify to just how unenlightened I actually am. I'm coming at this more as a non-dual investigative journalist. So this is kind of like 60 Minutes. Okay. I mentioned a metaphor. For those of you who were last year, I kind of used as my organizing metaphor the idea that first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. Okay? So in the first there is a mountain period of our spiritual development, spiritual awareness, spiritual awakening, the first thing we go through is this: I need the world to be a certain way. I need the world to be a certain way because my happiness actually depends on having external conditions be met for me, on controlling the actions of others, and the idea that there's a unique me. Okay? That's the ground, really, where we kind of all start from. We all start at that first stage. And then, still where there is a mountain, when we tire of that, or we get a little bit further into that, it becomes not so much that I need the world to be, but I need myself to be. Okay? And this is where my happiness begins to depend on transforming or fixing a self, better functioning self, finding spiritual truth, or following my bliss. And again, my perception is that my happiness depends on this. It's really important. And you also have to kind of go through this stage before, in a way, you're ripe for the mountain to go away. And the moment of the mountain going away is a moment of enlightenment, of awareness, of awakening. But there are two flavors, and I'll talk more about this, but there are two flavors of that awakening experience. One tends to be head-centered and tends to be more masculine. Doesn't mean that men, the gender, that happens to them more, but on a spectrum of masculine and feminine kinds of ways of reacting to the world, there's a head-centered expression. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's basically characterized by, I'm free. I'm free because I need nothing. There's no separate, unique me to need anything. So that head-centered awareness is a kind of freedom, a freedom often found in emptiness, the void. Then there is a heart-centered awakening, which tends to be a more feminine expression of that. And instead of freedom, the word is love. I am love because I feel everything. I realize the distinction between a separate me and a separate you is just an illusion. But both of those, and they're both wonderful, they're both powerful, but in a way they're both incomplete in themselves. And if you just have one, it's very hard to stabilize. It's very hard for behavior in the world to shift. Your way of being in the world doesn't shift as profoundly as it might. So, and it leaves you unprepared for what happens when the mountain comes back. Okay? Because the mountain always comes back. So, one of the things that Isaac said that I loved is how important it is to get our language in alignment. Because in the non-dual world, I think we argue about words we use, assuming everybody knows what we mean. Well, that we all know what that phrase means. I'm not saying my definition's right, but I just want to put my definition out there so that we don't waste time arguing over stuff we don't need to argue. There is a state of enlightenment. And it's a state that consciousness, you can kind of enter into at any moment using a variety of methods. That's where the sense of I drops away. Okay. And then there's a stage of enlightenment. And that's where enlightenment, consciousness gets expressed as this ever-increasing capacity to dissolve the boundaries between I and other. And you actually can live that in the world. A state you can move into and out of, it can arise. This, I think, is what Isaac was talking about with attention. You know, at any moment, a good meditation teacher, a good, someone leading a satsang can take you into a state where that drops away. Okay. But then, you know, we got to go get in our car and drive home and deal with the kids and stuff like that. And, you know, bam, the mountain comes back. And, and it's hard to hold that awareness. I think that too many people mistake that state that they have with actually the evolutionary shift in consciousness that a stage represents. I think that we tend to think, oh, wow, man, I had it. I popped. It was wonderful. I'm enlightened. My work here is done. Okay? And that's really what I want to talk about today. First of all, I want to go on record. Happiness, I'm for it. Okay? I know that if I get happiness all the time, 24/7, I won't recognize it. So I need sadness to arise sometime, just because, like you said, if I get chocolate 24/7, I'm going to hate chocolate. But if I get it as a treat, it's like, okay, chocolate's amazing. I'm in favor of happiness. I've always kind of been interested in people being happier. We just tend to look for it in all the wrong places. Okay? And you know where you look for it. We all know where we look for happiness. Stuff. Covers a wide variety of things. And once we've exhausted all the usual suspects for where happiness is hiding, we often get seduced by this idea of spiritual purity. Okay, if it's not in all those other things, then it must be in refining the vessel. It must be in becoming a better, more beautiful, more enlightened spiritual me. But ultimately, we're still looking for happiness. That's still what's driving us. We know that seeking happiness actually can become an obstacle to finding it because it's a transient state. It's never where you left it. Right? This is what you learn as a man. This is what you learn in the Tantra of relationship. Okay? The thing that made your intimate partner really happy doesn't work every time. You gotta think, you gotta come up with new stuff. Right? It's like just feeding her chocolate, because it made her happy once, doesn't work. You've got to come up with something new. But knowing that doesn't mean that happiness is no longer a beautiful or desirable state. Some people find happiness in emptiness. Some people find it in fullness. And some people get stuck in faux enlightenment on just the other side of the rainbow. Which brings me to The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so that's me at 3 years old. That was easy. I've got all kinds of pictures of me, cute baby pictures coming up. When I was 3 years old, the world I was growing up in, one of the ways you identified dad or a man was because he was in charge of the keys. Okay? He had the jingling car keys, he had the house key, he was the one that started stuff up, unlocked stuff. So I'm 3 years old, I'm in Germany, my dad's stationed over there with my living in military housing, and I have found a key that somebody left. And I don't know how many things I tried to unlock with that key before I found the power outlet. Boy, that opened some stuff up.
That's the metaphor.
Yeah. I was actually thrown across the room, knocked unconscious. what my mother tells me, I was unconscious, but I have such a strong memory of not being unconscious. What I have a memory of is this amazing color. Just, I mean, I can still touch that color. I mean, it's color you could smell, color you could feel. It was so amazing. And this awareness of looking down at me, and my mother picking me up and taking me to putting me on a couch and crying, and there was this idea of, I want to be in this world of color, this, but I was getting kind of drawn back down into self, and there was this moment where, it just, boom, I'm now back in the black and white world. So fast forward a couple of years, and some of you are old enough to remember that The Wizard of Oz was shown once a year on TV, and it was a big event on Sundays. And it must have been the point where I was first old enough that my parents felt that it was, I was old enough to handle the Wizard of Oz, the story. Because it was the first time I saw it. And many of you, I hope you guys have seen the movie. Has anybody not seen the movie The Wizard of Oz? Okay, I'll have a lot of pictures, so I think you'll get the story. But it starts out in black and white. And back in the day, they even had to put a disclaimer on the TV, do not adjust your color, because the first part of this movie is in black and white. They had to tell you that. So I'm watching this movie, and I think it's pretty cool. This is kind of interesting, all this stuff happening in black and white. But then she lands in Oz. And I become transfixed to the TV. My mother says, you were in a trance. Because there was something about going from the black and white to the world of color that was so, it touched some part of me in a way that, it started this kind of lifelong love affair with the movie The Wizard of Oz. I watched it again recently, and I saw it in almost a completely different way as a post-Enlightenment parable. Okay? I wasn't stoned. I didn't have to turn the sound down and put on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Because Dorothy is a seeker. And there is actually a seeker in all of us, and it's part of why Dorothy resonates. The story resonates. Dorothy is us. We're Dorothy in this story. But also, it's useful to realize that every character Dorothy encounters in this story is also her. Okay? It's an aspect. We were talking yesterday about voices. These different voices inside us that tend to speak or tend to express things. These characters, these voices are made manifest. They represent both her enlightened potential and her egoic resistance to change. So the movie starts in the black and white world of Kansas. And I think black and white is pretty cool because it's black or black and white. It's like, it's a world of duality and separation. How do we know this? Because the conflicts that begin in this movie are all about boundaries. The first one that kicks the movie off is Toto violates Elmira Gulch's garden fence and chases her cat. Okay? And this enrages Elmira Gulch, who comes with an order of the sheriff to take the dog away. We also see this in Dorothy is balancing on the pig pen fence where they've told her not to play, and she falls in. Okay? So she's trying to walk this world, of balance, this world of where all attention is on the boundaries. All attention is on the distinction, the separation. When she runs away, you see the vast painted landscape of Kansas, which is a world of fences. And then a little while later, fences literally get ripped from the ground. Boundaries get torn apart as she faces her greatest fear. So Dorothy intuits that there's something beyond this world of boundaries, that there's something that something else she could pay attention to, someplace else her attention could rest on. We hear this in the song. If happy little bluebirds fly above the rainbow, why oh why can't I? Right? Isn't that the question that drives us all? Really, isn't that the question that is behind a lot of our... If other people can be happy and spiritual, why can't I? If other people can be enlightened... But Dorothy also acts. Dorothy is not passive. Dorothy is not just hanging out, waiting for something to shift. And while there may not be a direct connection between any one spiritual practice and enlightenment, I also think it's sometimes less than useful to say that doing nothing is the best way to achieve enlightenment. Okay? There is a moment where you have to let go of doing. But I think it confuses people more than helps them to say, well, just do nothing. And you'll be enlightened. You'll get enlightened. That's how it happens. Okay? Because is that working for anybody? It's undeniably true that we don't get much say over when the seed of enlightenment or awareness or awakening sprouts within us. But it's also true that that seed is far less likely to sprout on barren ground. If we're not actively questioning, if we're not engaging in inquiry, if we're not doing, if there is not some doing that is arising within us, it's unlikely that we're going to get anywhere. So Toto, little dog, for all of you who have not seen it before, Toto, little black dog, is the nudging force that moves Dorothy out of her complacency. Okay? Toto gets her into this mess to begin with. It's Toto that crosses the fence, and what Toto is challenging is the part of Dorothy that probably wants to clamp down on all the talk of over the rainbow stuff. Okay? There's a part of Dorothy that knows that, probably what I really should do is just marry one of these guys and, be like everybody else. And so Toto is really all about, no, let's go for this. Let's shake things up a little bit.
His name's Tutu.
Yeah. And that voice in Dorothy is Elmira Gulch. Elmira Gulch is who Dorothy is going to be in 30 or 40 years. Unless she wakes up. Okay? Elmira's attention is now so focused on the boundaries, on the distinction, on the separation, okay, that you can see the clench in her, where energy just can't move because she's just so clenched around the way things should be. And her job is to separate Dorothy from her animating force, okay? Because if she could do that, if she could get rid of Toto, Dorothy would be probably hurt, crushed, possibly into submission. But Toto escapes, transgresses yet another boundary. And Dorothy realizes she can't survive without that part of her. And so she runs away to meet her first guru. Now, I put a typical huckster and fraud in question mark because it's easy to see him that way. Just like it's so easy to see a lot of gurus, a lot of people who put themselves up, or we put them up on pedestals as, oh, you're my teacher, oh, you're so much, okay? So, but I'm not sure, we love to put them up there and then tear them down. There's something about that just we really get into. But how many fraud gurus turn students away when they recognize they're not ready for this? Not many. Most gurus want this, more people come, give me money, doesn't matter whether you're ready or not, just come, come. But this guy says, no, I don't really think you're ready. How many frauds turn students back toward that thing they're running away from? Again, my experience, not too many. Don't great teachers often trick us into seeing past our own, our own limitations? Because if it's true that you don't find enlightenment by seeking enlightenment, it's probably equally true that you don't find enlightenment by running away from what seems like its opposite. Okay? And the moment that he turns Dorothy's attention, that he helps Dorothy place her attention back on herself, as opposed to, I need different circumstances, I need the world to change, the moment he turns her attention back on herself, the storm begins. Right? The storm. As it does for all of us. The moment we get that, man, all this stuff I've been spending a lifetime chasing, waiting for, those circumstances I've been waiting to change, they're not going to change. Okay? And our focus goes back. We begin to be ready for a shift. So Dorothy returns home, but once you begin to really question, home is not a safe, comfortable place anymore. You can't just go back. Notice that so far in the story, Dorothy has gone through the first two stages that I mentioned when first there is a mountain. She's thought it was other stuff, other people that she had to run away from or go find other circumstances. And her guru, her teacher says, no, that's not it. Okay? This is about you. So Dorothy begins her dark night of the soul by being hit on the head. Perhaps a key to what kind of enlightenment experience she's actually going to have. Her enlightenment is upending and ungrounding. Okay? I don't know which hole this is, Gary, but I think it's one of them. Okay? She sees her ego for what it really is. Okay? This is me defining again. I see enlightenment more as a process. It's a sometimes gradual and sometimes very dramatic expansion of consciousness from the exclusive, like what I can contain in this small sphere is just me. A kind of enlightenment is to be able to hold you and me as the same. More enlightenment is to be able to hold you and me and people like us. We are all the same. We're all one. Okay? More enlightenment is you and me and people like us and a few interlopers, will be cool with them. And more enlightenment is, okay, that asshole that cut me off, he's part of me too, to be ever more inclusive. Usually it's gradual. It happens gradually that we expand that bubble. But when it's sudden, we feel it as a pop. And when that pop experience happens, it somehow feels more meaningful, more significant. It gets we become really aware of it. Some people evolve through spiritual practice and the rigorous questioning of everyday existence. This is inquiry. Some people evolve through intense contact with more enlightened beings, which we'll hear more about, I think. Right, Trent? You'll be... Yeah, okay. That wasn't a spoiler alert, I don't think. And some people evolve through crisis and conflict, breaking through where most people break down. Crisis and catharsis is Dorothy's path in this story. Dorothy's pop of enlightenment is more like a thud, kind of the sound a house makes when it lands on your ego. Okay? Okay? Dorothy has like, in that moment, she's disconnected from, she's annihilated her ego. So isn't enlightenment that moment when we realize we're not in Kansas anymore? Because that's what that pop feels like. Well, yes and no. Welcome to Munchkin Land. Technically, a small suburb of Oz. Okay? Munchkin Land. Munchkin Land is profoundly different from where you just were. So when you have that pop of awakening and awareness and you go, man, this is so different. This feels so amazing. This is so different. It's a world of color. Oh my God. It's very much what that pop of enlightenment feels like. But Munchkin Land is the place for your little enlightenment. Okay? And by little, I don't mean to demean it. It's beautiful. It's profound. But it's like, okay, so you've had that pop. Okay? It's like, now what are you going to do with it? But in Munchkin Land, well, first, how do you know that we've landed in Munchkin Land? Well, other Munchkins really do welcome you. Okay? That's one way you know. There's quite a lot of fellowship and self-congratulation in Munchkin Land. You know, oh, you've popped too? Everyone in Munchkin Land is pretty convinced they've killed off their egos. Right? They give you certificates and honors and try to get you to settle down in Munchkin Land, where every day is a satsang. They spend a lot of time talking about or debating the fine points of non-duality, right? The semantics of awareness become a big deal. Unfortunately, not always in the service of greater clarity, but we go at those words that we use. In other words, Munchkin Land is a lot like Facebook non-duality discussion. My favorite exchange in a Facebook non-duality discussion group is you're having a conversation with somebody, and somebody jumps in and says, those are just thoughts. You're just expressing thoughts. And then goes on to write 3 paragraphs. And when you say, aren't those just thoughts too? No, I'm enlightened. I'm beyond thought. I'm simply expressing pure awareness. Yours are just thoughts. The same year, Munchkins, year after year, celebrating their little enlightenment and congratulating themselves, and nothing much really changes. Munchkin Land is a great place to hang out. Don't get me wrong. It's a great place to reinforce, positive reinforcement for whatever witch your house landed on. But if you buy a condo and think your work is done, don't be surprised if the witch's sister shows up. Which is exactly what happens to Dorothy. She gets there and, man, you killed the witch. We love you. You're great. Come on, we're going to have a parade for you. The problem is that she just kind of accidentally defeated her ego. That victory of the non-dual selfless self over the separate and bounded egoic identity was just a byproduct of her consciousness kind of cathartically expanding all of a sudden, rather than an active choice on her part. She really actually didn't understand that her investment in her own identity, her own sense of self, was what was keeping her from finding her way over the rainbow to begin with. That wasn't a conscious realization. That was this just, oh wow, I landed on a witch. An awakening out of crisis often fractures an egoic self, but it seldom actually eliminates it. Unfortunately, to remain a member in good standing in Munchkin Land, you have to almost reflexively deny ego. Continually and reflexively, no ego here, nope, nope. No ego, got no ego, nope, you can check. Completely ego-free. Which just pisses an ego off. Because the ego witch in all of us has its highest priority is to protect the unique and separate sense of self. Okay? And her first line of defense is intimidation, is threatening. you keep talking about oneness, and bad shit is going to happen to you and your little dog too. Okay? Here, if you're keeping score, I just swore. She actually can't kill Dorothy, not at least in Munchkinland, but she does vow to interfere with her journey. So you might be asking, wait a minute, what journey? She's enlightened, she's done. Where is there for her to go? But in this story, Glinda, who represents that kind of voice of unity and transcendence, suggests that she still has work to do. And how does she do that? Ruby slippers. Can Dorothy walk the talk of her newfound enlightenment? Can she live it? Can she embody that enlightenment? The thing I love about Glinda is she's describing this challenge of embodiment, and she tells Dorothy she has a journey to make, but gives her no advice on how to get there. This is why Glinda is not a guru. Glinda is something else. You know? She doesn't say, come, follow me, join my ashram, and in 25 years, I will get you to the wizard. Okay? No. She basically says, you got to find the wizard. Ta-ta. Now, all the Munchkins know which way to go. But they have no interest in going down that road. Right? They all stop. No one says, we'll go with you to see the wizard. Nope. There's a line right there. They are not crossing. But I understand that, because that road takes you beyond that little enlightenment that feels so precious to you. You want to protect that when you've had it. It's this amazing experience. You want to hang out in Munchkinland. That's okay, but if you spend too long in Munchkinland, you're never going to embody that enlightenment. It's a hard road to take. It's also risky and scary to think of encountering ego again outside of the safe confines of Munchkinland. And there's nothing wrong with non-duality conferences, or retreats, or satsangs.
Except staying there all
Yeah, except living there. It's not where you want to again, move in. This is the part of the story that's chop wood and carry water. That comes after enlightenment in the Zen parable. Okay? So before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, you still got to chop wood and carry water. She's still got to make that journey. Paradoxica. It's paradoxical that it's a non-duality conference, and I'm going to be talking about the different voices of separate selves that seem to be trying to express themselves through us. Now I have to backtrack a bit on this yellow brick road, or this won't make sense. Of course, it may not make sense anyway. But this is something that I talked about last year. These two flavors of awakening. I mentioned this at the beginning. They're really defined by your polarity preferences, where you tend to rest on a polarity of masculine or feminine. And again, it doesn't have to do with your gender. As a gendered person, you can be at one end of the spectrum, and in one moment, the other end of the spectrum at the other. You can be anywhere on that spectrum. But where you tend to rest when you relax, where your natural attention rests, how it expresses itself, tends to be on one side or the other. So masculine enlightenment tends to be head-centered. It tends to think, I know this. I can describe this eloquently with language. I revel in the emptiness of the void. I am free. Okay? That's the masculine flavor. The feminine flavor is, I feel this. I can dance this exquisitely with my body. I revel in the full beauty of the oneness in all its form. I am loved. Okay? Very different experiences. Or maybe it's the same experience, just where our attention is at the moment that it happens. So one is feeling, the other tends to be knowing. Both are profound, and both are incomplete in themselves. Without both, we don't stabilize into actual enlightened behavior. We just have enlightened feelings or enlightened thoughts. Okay? This is Dorothy's challenge. And how are you going to bring those two things together? And it's reflected in the other aspects of herself that she meets along the yellow brick road. The scarecrow represents masculine, head-centered enlightenment. Okay? So when we meet him, he's just hanging out. Okay? Just hanging out. He's annoyingly non-committal. Ladies, this is your non-dual boyfriend. I don't know. What do you want to do? He doesn't want to be pinned down, right? Ironically, that's where he's stuck there, but what he wants first and most is like to get down off this pole. I don't want to be stuck. I want to be free. His freedom is more important to him than anything. He wants truth. He wants to know. And we all recognize pretty quickly in this story that he already is that which he seeks. He already has that which he's looking for. Even as little kids, we knew that. We got the fact that he's figuring stuff out from the get-go. He doesn't need a brain. He's already got that. The Tin Man represents feminine, heart-centered enlightenment. Okay? Kind of paralyzed by his own emotionality. When a more feminine person opens to enlightenment, it can be paralyzing. I feel everything so intensely. Because there's no boundaries between me and other, and I feel it. No, I don't know what to do with it. Sometimes annoyingly passive. Okay. Doesn't want to be stuck. Wants to move. The feminine is energy. It wants to move. It's frustrated by unlove. I'm love. So why aren't you love? Back to me. Why aren't you loving me as much as I love you? I love all of you. I love everybody. And really wants to feel. And we recognize pretty quickly that he already has, he already is that and already has that which he desires. When Dorothy begins to integrate head and heart, the witch turns up again. More raging, more threats. This is because our first enlightenment tends to feel profound because it usually aligns with our masculine or feminine comfort zone. But that second hit of enlightenment that's the polar opposite often feels rather uncomfortable because it's not our comfort zone. It's not where we're particularly happy being. When we're faced with having to integrate our polar opposite, it's going to feel more challenging, shocking, frightening, destabilizing, because we thought we were already enlightened. And we never like hearing that we're not as enlightened as we thought we were. To the feminine in all of us, and all of us have a feminine aspect, to the feminine in all of us, masculine enlightenment is frightening. It's all of Gary's black holes. Okay? Yeah, I know, if you're honest, there were some of you watching Gary yesterday going, no, that's not really, not interested in an endless realm of pit of black holes, each getting worse than the one before. Okay? It feels dark and empty and nihilistic. It's Pamela's smelly place. Okay? That the femininists would rather not go. I'm just realizing there may not be people laughing because they didn't hear you yesterday. Okay, so to the masculine in all of us, feminine enlightenment is emotional and complicated and messy. Okay? It's Shayla's tango. Okay? It blooms and blossoms in relationship. And it's the exact opposite of blissful emptiness. So as a guy, it's like, I want things to stop, to settle, to get quiet. That's not how my partner experiences bliss, though. So if I'm trying to force my bliss on her, which is, can we all be quiet and just sit? She's cranking up the volume and dancing, and I want a completely different experience of it. We also notice that After the witch shows up the second time, the forest gets darker and scarier. Because it's not going to be easy to live in an unenlightened world in an enlightened way. Just isn't, from an enlightened perspective. Which is why Dorothy needs to meet her as yet unrealized courage. Because it takes courage to seek and speak the truth. It really does. To tell people, what's true takes courage. It also takes courage to bare your heart in an emotionally thorny world. To live as freedom, to live as love. These are not easy things to do. The world is not saying, we need more people living as true freedom and true love. It's actually kind of the opposite. They're saying, we've got it figured out. That's not what we want. We're not really interested in that. Which points to something really important in this story. And that is that there's a kind of passivity in enlightenment that signals that it's not yet fully realized. It doesn't engage the world, but tends to hold back in the name of purity and the preservation of the enlightened state. In other words, if you've had that enlightened moment, and the only way to maintain it is to put a barrier around yourself, I only let pure people into my energy field. I only let people wearing white clothes and who've been cleansed come into my aura space. There's a kind of passivity about that form of enlightenment that tells me it's not fully realized yet. And then there's a fierce enlightenment that really engages the world with the fearlessness of one who's dived into the deepest emptiness and found peace there. Or has allowed self to dissolve into the oneness of being and found bliss there. When enlightenment of the head, I know it, and the heart, I feel it, and courage, I can live it fearlessly, come together, we become formidable in the face of egoic identity, clinging, suffering in ourselves and for the whole world. Of course, that doesn't mean the witch of ego is given up. Okay? Just because you're starting to bring those things together, this time, instead of threats, she seduces Dorothy with the promise of going back to sleep and returning to a more comfortable time. This is one of the ego witch's 3 primary weapons for getting you off this path. Okay? Pamela, were you the one yesterday who was talking about firing your inner... It's like, that's what the witch is worried about. Okay?
She's worried of being fired.
Yeah, she's worried that she's going to get fired. And she's fighting this pretty strongly. Dorothy succumbs to this temptation, but her enlightened aspects, her head and her heart, know this is a trap. It's just that without embodied courage, they're not really that effective. And so they have to appeal to Dorothy's higher self for help, which in this case works. Of course, each time it seems like we've overcome an egoic challenge, it seems like we're set up with a bigger challenge. All right? Ego seems amazingly adept at co-opting the states of enlightenment we experience to kind of set up roadblocks, each one of them disguised as the end of the journey. Okay? An infinite number of, you have made it. Go no further. Take your shoes off, have a good meal, whatever. And if you make it to the Emerald City, go around it. This is the Wizard of Oz version of if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. Because the Emerald City is just a different version of Munchkinland. Where the Munchkins were completely satisfied with their enlightened state experience, the citizens of the Emerald City have entrusted their awakening to a guru. Right? Notice how well defended the Emerald City is. Right? Anyone can land in Munchkinland and say, I'm enlightened. And everybody goes, woohoo, you're welcome. Great. Okay? But to get into the Emerald City, you need a pedigree, a lineage, a referral, or really cool shoes. That works. Inside the Emerald City, it's all about appearances. This is kind of the ashram model of enlightened community. Right? If we all wear white and turbans, or if we all agree to, again, I've lost track of who was saying this, but yesterday we were talking about, was it Shayla, you were saying meeting the person who said, how are you? Michael is fine. If we all agree externally to some certain rules, like we're going to refer to ourselves in the third person, that's how we're going to get to enlightenment. Purity is hugely important in ashrams. And before seeing the wizard or guru, Dorothy's party must first go through a ritual cleansing. Okay? Right? They do her hair, they dye her eyes to match her dress, and stuff him and stuff. But before we actually see the wizard, I want to talk a little bit about Dorothy's motivation. Because all along she's been saying that what she wants is to return home. But I don't think that her returning home means to go back to the way things were. Dorothy knows something important that's often overlooked by those seeking peace or bliss or happiness through enlightenment. She knows that her enlightenment won't be complete or actualized until she can carry it home. That's the drive to go home. It's not to go back, but anything that I've realized won't truly be realized unless I can carry this home. When we use our newfound sense of the lack of separation as that thing that separates us from our family and community, it's possible that we're missing something. Right? I know so many people who've, I've discovered spiritual bliss, and what I've learned is that I can never go home to my family because they just destroy it. I can't be enlightened around my family. It may not be as fully realized as you think it is. And so this desire to return home brings Dorothy to the wizard. So, is the wizard another fraud? Again, it's real easy to see the wizard as a fraud, but it may also be that he recognizes that he can't give them what they already possess. And he may recognize that they're not ready to hear this yet. Because when you struggle to the top of the mountain to ask the guru, what's the secret of life? And when will I be enlightened? And the guru says, you are the secret to life, and you are already enlightened. You just want to kill him. Because you weren't ready for that. So the wizard, though, does kind of betray his own level of enlightenment with his obsession with ego. Despite the fact that the Emerald City seems to be founded on ego, the wizard wants Dorothy to prove she's vanquished hers. Okay? And why the broom? Why does she have to bring him the broom? Well, you could look at that two ways. One is the broom is the way the witch gets around. So by eliminating the broom, the ego can't do as much damage because it just can't get out there, can't move around. But also you could think kind of prosaically, what does a broom do? It sweeps up, it cleans up. I want you to go clean up your little ego mess. So off Dorothy goes to confront the ego that, according to the non-duality expert, should not be remaining if she's had her moment of enlightenment. If we have the courage to leave Munchkinland, this is often where we find ourselves. At this point, the witch, Dorothy's own ego, unleashes one of her remaining weapons. Flying monkeys. Now, ego is really just another name for a sense of self. Some egos are tyrannical. They try and oppress all the other voices within. Some egos are more egalitarian. But what all egos have in common is that they truly believe in themselves as separate and unique identities. Okay? I am this. Not this is happening, this is arising in me, but I am this. Anything that challenges an egoic sense of self or I feels like death and must be defended at all costs. So far, Dorothy's experienced her own ego's threats and intimidation. And if your ego can scare you back into line, it will. It's tried seductive comforts. If ego can lull us back into sleep or complacency, it will. And finally, monkey mind. Flying monkey mind. If our ego can distract us with pesky and persistent doubts, it will. Will my partner still love me if I stop playing egoic games upon which our relationship is based? Because if that's true, maybe I should stop. Right? I don't want to wreck the relationship just for the sake of being awakened for all time. What if my guru isn't authentic? What if there's a better path to enlightenment than the one I'm on? I'm pretty sure that everyone in this room is more enlightened than I am. Or what if I'm already enlightened? Okay. So these are doubts. These doubts are the flying monkeys. It's this monkey mind that cannot settle that keeps us in a state of crisis. And despite her ability to face down the threats that she's faced down so far, the intimidation, the seductive nature of falling back asleep, it's the doubts, the busyness of mind that succeeds in separating her from her enlightened self and carry her off to be imprisoned by her own ego. The witch ego wants one thing at this point, and that's to distract Dorothy from fully embodying her enlightenment. Because that means death to that ego. That's what that feels like. This is symbolized in getting Dorothy's ruby slippers. She can't take the slippers off, she can't take the slippers away, and Dorothy can't give them away, so she threatens to kill Dorothy. This is the ultimate power play of the ego. The ego would rather bring your world crashing down than be seen for what it is. Poor Dorothy now has to face another dark night of the soul, symbolically separated from her enlightened self that had once seemed so permanent, so fixed, so true. We experience pain in life because it's part of the deal. If you're not sure about that? Read the fine print of your incarnation contract. It's there. You don't get away from pain. But we suffer because we cling to impermanent things, expecting them to be permanent. Children, lovers, jobs, status, toys, happiness, my spirituality, my enlightenment. We expect these things to be permanent when they aren't. And that causes us to suffer. We experience the clinging to identity as a clench in the body, in the heart, and the mind. And that clench, you saw in Elmira Gulch at the beginning. You know, that clench. You can see it in people. You can see it in people, you know, not in this room, of course. But when you go out in the world, you can see people and you go, ooh, that must be painful. You know, it's not the wow moment, it's the ow moment. An experience of enlightenment or awakening or sudden liberation reveals this hidden clench and sometimes frees us from an old identity. The challenge then is to not simply replace that old unenlightened sense of self with a new enlightened identity that, again, must be defended at all costs. This is why in the story, Dorothy must face this second, even more frightening dark night of the soul. And while Dorothy wants to collapse in tears and despair, Toto is not giving up. Right? Toto finds and helps reconnect her to her enlightened perspective and feelings and to her courage. And together they face the ego witch. But Dorothy doesn't defeat her ego in some kind of magical combat. She doesn't suppress it or deny it. In the moment of crisis, with the scarecrow burning, Dorothy uses her mind. She trusts her compassionate heart, and she has the courage to act by putting the fire out in that moment. No hesitation. She's not thinking, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? Let's weigh the consequences. It's an instinctive act that comes from an enlightened mind, enlightened heart, and embodied courage to act in that moment. And in dousing the flames with the water, she also gets water on the witch, but what that does is actually dissolve her attachment to the witch. Okay? She doesn't have to kill the witch. She simply has to recognize that that's not me. It may appear again, it may come up again, but it's not me. And I recognize that now. Back in the Emerald City, the wizard still prevaricates. Right? It may be true, it may be that when faced with a higher form of enlightenment than his own, he's kind of at a loss for nothing to offer. But I tend to think of it as, it may be that his final teaching is to lay aside his own ego in order to help Dorothy understand that everything she was seeking, she already has. Only now are they able to hear that the Scarecrow has always had a brain, the Tin Man has always had a heart, and the Lion has always had his courage. What he doesn't understand is how powerful Dorothy's embodied enlightenment actually is. He doesn't understand that she could get wherever she needs to go on her own. It takes Glenda to finally share the secret of going home with Dorothy. But hey, if the good witch and the bad witch are just identities, why is the bad witch a problem and the good witch isn't? Right? Well, I think it's because it comes down to attachment. Glenda's a useful identity that Dorothy may pick up in any moment, but Glenda isn't fighting to be seen and heard and taken seriously, which is what the witch has been doing the whole time. See me, respect me, do not fire me, stay away from that, don't do that. Glenda floats in on a bubble. Right? Yeah. In Dorothy's life, the relationship to Glenda is not fixed or static. Okay? So that's why Glenda isn't the same problem that the witch was. And with masculine and feminine enlightenment both embodied, Dorothy's finally able to return home. When masculine enlightenment is tempered with feminine enlightenment, I am free becomes I am freedom. And there's a difference. When I'm free, it's a sense that I could be imprisoned again. When I am freedom, it's anything that imprisons me is also contained within me. I am freedom. I am actually a gift of freedom that can be given to the world. And the same thing is true when feminine enlightenment is tempered with masculine enlightenment. I am loved becomes I am love. I'm no longer seeking to be filled with love from the world. I am love. I am already full. Not much to do with this other than give it away. Give it freely. And I can't give it all away. I mean, I can't empty myself of it because I'm constantly refilled with that sense of love. So I put this in this morning because Shayla brought up this beautiful thing yesterday when she was talking about learning the tango. And that with her partner, she had gotten to this point of learning that there's a moment where she had to say no when her partner was trying to lead her in a way that felt awkward, maybe painful, maybe unbalanced, but certainly not sensitive to your energy, which is what you were describing. And you needed to know that you could say no. And that was an act of courage and honesty that actually made for better communication between the two of you. So I just wanted to take that backwards from where you are and forward, maybe, from where you are. Backwards from where you are is in masculine and feminine relationship and dynamics, there's a kind of masculine that's all about leading. Okay? I want to direct. I want to take us where I want to go. There's no sensitivity there to where you want to go. It's not about we. It's not about us. It's where I want to go and you will go with me because you are my chattel. Okay? Okay. Now, if we're learning the tango and I'm in that stage and you're in that similar matching stage of the feminine, it's like, yes, I'll go where you want to go as long as you love me. As long as I'm the pretty one, I'm the special one, I'll go where you want me to go. Okay? Well, for you as a woman to grow, for your consciousness to expand, you've got to say, wait, this is not making me happy. This is actually painful, dancing this way. Stop. Okay? And for a man to grow, he's got to say, there is something greater than where I want to go. There is something in the where we want to go. It's in taking more responsibility for leading and listening. Leading and being sensitive to where you want to go. And that's a huge step for a couple in terms of embodying an advance in consciousness. It might also be that an awakened tango, just as a possibility holding out there, that an awakened tango might be a masculine partner that leads with such sensitivity that he takes you someplace you didn't know you wanted to go, that feels amazing, that you can actually surrender and allow yourself to be taken to. Okay? But it's because he's constantly sensing, almost ahead of you, where it would be, where you would want to go. He's giving you the gift of his guidance, his direction, freedom, but it's not self-centered. It's not about, hey, it's my way or the highway. You're going where I'm going. It's, what gift can I give you? And that allows you potentially to relax into the place of how amazing would it feel to be fully relaxed on that dance floor and to fully trust that wherever my partner's taking me, he's feeling into where I want to go. He's feeling into where it would be best for us to go. Because the feminine is the energy. The feminine is the river. And the masculine becomes the banks of that river. Without the banks, that feminine energy just floods. It overruns the banks. But when it's contained by the banks, it's powerful. It's amazing. Sometimes it flows gently. Sometimes it rages. But it's that dance together. So that's the awakened tango. Back in Kansas, Dorothy has cycled through. First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, and now she's back finally to then there is. But the wisdom that actually gets her home was what she shared with Glenda before leaving Oz. She said, if I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I won't look any further than my own backyard. Because if it isn't there, I never really lost it to begin with. That's our challenge. The challenge of post-enlightenment living. It may be that enlightenment, waking up, is not as difficult as we thought. Because it seems like a lot of people are having awakening experiences all over the world. It may be the real work is not in waking up, but embodying that waking, living into it. Which means that I was that which I had been seeking all along. And in the fullness of that love or the freedom of that emptiness, I become just an offering. To paraphrase Dorothy, if your enlightenment can't shine through your work and your relationships, it might not be as complete as you think it is. Okay? If your enlightenment can't stand up to holidays with your family, might not be as embodied as it could be. If enlightened is the new you, then it's time to hit the yellow brick road. So in closing, some lessons from the yellow brick road. Whatever illumination or awakening you experience is beautiful and valuable. It's wonderful. It just may not be as permanent, and it certainly isn't the end. Try not to get stuck in Munchkin land. There's a yellow brick road, follow it. Understand your preferences and make room for your polarities. Be aware of what your ego is going to use to distract you from embodiment. That's fear, seductive comfort, and uncertainty. The uncertainty of pesky thoughts. Don't get stuck in the Emerald City. Teachers can be helpful, but they can't get you to enlightenment. Don't be too quick to judge your teachers. They might be teaching you in spite of themselves. Okay? Your ego is just your sense of self. You'll never conquer it or control it. You may, with practice, recognize it for what it is. And the problem isn't that you have an ego, it's that you believe your ego is who you are. And finally, until your mountain comes back, it's hard to say how permanent and embodied your enlightenment actually is.